Palmering feathers is a basic fly tying skill that is used on flies of various types and sizes. Our focus here is on palmering larger feathers used in warm water and saltwater patterns. Starting with the right materials makes a big difference. Feathers that work well for palmering have a flexible stem, are usually relatively long, and have barbs that are the correct length for the fly being tied. Saddle feathers are ideal. Feathers can be tied in either by the tip or the butt, depending on the shape you want the fly to have, and whether and how you want to use a downy material towards the base of the feather. Since most feathers taper from a thin tip to a wider butt, hackle tied in by the tip and wrapped forward will be narrower towards the back of the fly and wider in front. If tied in by the butt and wrapped forward, the hackle will be wider in back and narrower in front. If you plan to tie the feather in by the tip, come down a little ways from the very end to where you think the stem will be strong enough to not break. Hold the tip of the feather in one hand, and with your other, pinch the feather further down where you'd like the tie-in point to be, and pull the barbs away from the tip. This will open up a gap right down to the stem of the feather. This will be your tie-in point. If the tip of the feather extends further than you'd like, just trim off the excess. To tie the feather in, make sure your thread is wrapped to where you want to attach it, and orient the feather with the shiny side, the side that would be on the outside of the bird, facing up. Tuck the tip of the feather up under the hook with the bare area right against the hook shank. Bring the thread around, trapping the feather against the hook shank. Add a couple locking wraps and continue tying. If you plan to tie the feather in by the butt, take one end in each hand and bend it through a curve to see where the stem begins to stiffen. The stiffer butt section will not wrap easily around a hook and needs to be trimmed off. After trimming, either strip or cut off a short length of barbs, a 1/4 inch or so, from each side of the butt end of the feather. If you trim with scissors, leave a little stubble to help lock the feather in. Next, you'll need to attach the feather to the hook shank. The feather should be tied in with the top of the feather, the glossier side, which would be on the outside of the bird, facing the front. This way, the barbs will naturally curve towards the back of the fly. Place the tie-in points on the feather against the bottom of the hook shank. Bring your thread around the hook shank, trapping the feather as you go, and add some locking wraps. Advance the thread up the hook, wrapping the loose ends down as you go, to where you plan to stop palmering. Secure the thread with a half hitch. Bring the bobbin cradle around if you're tying with a rotary vise, and hang the thread over it. If you have hackle pliers, clamp them to the end of the feather. Avoid the very tip, which may be too weak to take the tension. Wrap the feather up the hook shank in even wraps. They can be spaced out or right next to each other, depending on the pattern. If you're using a feather with flexible barbs, like the saddle I'm palmering with here, you may need to stroke the barbs back and out of the way to keep from trapping them under the next wrap. Neck hackle and stiffer saddle hackle will stick out straighter and won't need to be brushed back as much. When you reach the front of the hook, move the bobbin cradle out of the way if you've been using one. Pull the wrapped barbs back to get them out of the way, and use your materials hand to drop the bobbin over the hook shank and around the feather stem, trapping the feather. Then you can let the end of the feather go. I usually leave the excess feather attached while adding a few locking wraps. Corralling all the loose pieces is tricky. Use the triangle to pull them together and towards the back of the hook. Then I'll trim the feather off and continue tying. In this case, the fly is done, and it's time for a whip finish and some head cement.